Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
My name is Alan Davis, and I work as a mechanical engineer at a prominent automobile company. I was married to Rebecca for 5 years before she took my life and my marriage to hell. We had Timothy, our bright and curious 4-year-old son. I still remember the day Bill called to tell me he and Lori had bought a house in our neighborhood. "We'll be practically neighbors," he said, his voice brimming with excitement. At the time, I thought it would be a good thing. Timothy would get to spend more time with his cousins, and maybe Bill and I could reconnect, like the old days. We drifted apart a bit over the years, not because of any big fallout, but life just got in the way. At first, everything seemed fine. Rebecca, ever the thoughtful one, was thrilled for them. "They'll need help settling in," she told me one evening as we sat at the kitchen table. "I'll go over tomorrow and see if they need anything." And she did. She spent the day helping them unpack, organize, and figure out where to hang their pictures. When she came home that night, she was glowing with satisfaction. "Lori has such a great eye for decor," she said, pulling out her phone to show me pictures of their newly arranged living room. I nodded along, happy to see her happy. But as the weeks went by, those visits to Bill and Lori's house became more frequent. Rebecca wasn't just helping them settle in anymore. She was helping them with everything. She was over there almost every other day, fixing up their garden, brainstorming paint colors, babysitting their kids when Lori needed to run errands. It started bothering me, though I didn't say anything at first. I mean, what could I say? Rebecca was just being Rebecca, kind, generous, always willing to lend a hand. That's one of the things I loved most about her. But as time went on, I couldn't help but feel like she was spending more time at their house than she was at ours. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home to find Timothy sitting in front of the TV, eating cereal for dinner. Rebecca wasn't home yet. She texted earlier saying she was helping Bill with something and would be back later. I stood there in the doorway, watching Timothy as he laughed at the cartoon on the screen, completely unaware of my frustration. I couldn't shake the thought. Why was she over there again? What could possibly need so much help that it keeps her away from us? It wasn't just the time she spent there. It was the way it felt like Bill and Lori's house had become her priority. Our evenings together had become shorter, our conversations more scattered. When she was home, she'd often talk about the projects they were working on, how Lori wanted to redo the guest room, or how Bill was building a new deck and needed her input. I tried to brush it off. I told myself I was overreacting, that I was just tired from work. But the truth was, I didn't like it. I didn't like that she was spending so much time at their house. And the more it went on, the harder it was to ignore. The afternoon had been quiet, almost peaceful. I'd taken the rare day off work to spend time with Timothy. He was curled up beside me on the couch, his small body tucked into mine as we watched a nature documentary on National Geographic. It was about chimpanzees, one of Timothy's favorite animals. The narrator's voice was calm and soothing, explaining the intricate social dynamics of the chimps. On screen, a male chimp began getting frisky with a female. It was brief, nothing graphic, but enough to make me glance at Timothy to see if he'd even noticed. Tim, however, was completely unfazed. He stared at the screen with the same innocent curiosity he always had. Then, out of nowhere, he said something that sent a chill down my spine. "That's just like Uncle Billy and Mom," he said matter-of-factly, as though he were talking about a cartoon he'd seen earlier. I froze. My heart stopped for a moment, and my mind raced to process what he just said. I turned to him, trying to keep my voice calm, though my pulse was thundering in my ears. "What do you mean, buddy?" I asked, forcing a smile. Timothy looked up at me, his wide, innocent eyes blinking as if I'd asked him why the sky was blue. "2 days ago," he said, his voice cheerful and unbothered, "I saw Uncle Billy and Mom doing that." He pointed at the TV, where the chimps had now moved on to grooming each other. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Where did you see them, Tim?" "At Uncle Billy's house," he said, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I want to find Mom, but she was in the living room with Uncle Billy. Aunt Lori was there too. They were doing that." He gestured at the screen again, his little hand mimicking the chimp's movements. My stomach churned. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I didn't want to believe it. There had to be some explanation. Timothy was just a kid. Maybe he didn't understand what he'd seen. Maybe he'd misinterpreted something. I tried to probe further, keeping my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Tim, are you sure? What exactly were they doing?" He nodded earnestly. "They were hugging really close, like this." He wrapped his small arms around himself to demonstrate. "And Uncle Billy was making funny noises. Then Aunt Lori laughed, and Mom told me to go play outside." I couldn't breathe. My mind screamed at me to stop, to tell Timothy he must have been mistaken, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. Instead, I asked one more question, my voice barely above a whisper. Did they see you, Tim? He shook his head. No, I just saw them when I came inside. I don't think they saw me. I sat back on the couch, my head spinning. Timothy turned his attention back to the TV, oblivious to the weight of what he'd just told me. My hands trembled as I clenched them into fists, trying to make sense of it all. Rebecca, Billy, Lori. The names swirled in my mind like a dark storm cloud. Could it be true? Had I been blind to something happening right under my nose? I looked at Timothy, so innocent, so trusting. He didn't realize the magnitude of what he just said, but I did. And now, there was no going back. After what Timothy told me, I couldn't let it go. The thought gnawed at me constantly, like a splinter buried deep under my skin. I didn't confront Rebecca right away. I didn't know how to. If I was wrong, I'd shatter our marriage over nothing. But if I was right, I didn't want to think about it. So I decided to watch her. I started keeping track of when she left the house and where she said she was going. I kept my questions casual, pretending I was just being an attentive husband. Where are you off to, honey? Or what time should I expect you back? She never seemed suspicious of my sudden interest in her schedule, but I noticed patterns. Rebecca was spending more and more time at Bill and Lori's house. Even when she didn't explicitly say she was going there, I had a gut feeling that's where she'd be. At home, things began to shift. I couldn't bring myself to touch her. Every time she tried to initiate intimacy, I made an excuse. I'm tired, or I've got a headache. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. I didn't trust her, and it ate away at me. One day, I decided to act. I left work early, telling my boss I wasn't feeling well. As I drove home, my heart pounded in my chest. I didn't know what I was hoping to find. Part of me wanted to be proven wrong. Maybe she'd be at home, cleaning or playing with Timothy, and I'd feel like an idiot for doubting her. But as I pulled into our driveway, the house was eerily quiet. Her car wasn't there. I walked through the front door, calling out, "Rebecca? You home?" No answer. The emptiness of the house confirmed what I already suspected. I turned and headed toward Bill's house, my legs heavy with dread. The short walk felt like an eternity. As I approached, I noticed all the curtains were drawn, and the place looked still from the outside. I circled around to the back of the house, my footsteps soft against the grass. The back door from the kitchen area was slightly ajar. My heart raced as I pushed it open quietly and stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of perfume and something else, something musky. I moved through the kitchen, past the dining room, and toward the living room, following the muffled sounds I could hear in the distance. At first, I thought it was the TV, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't. It was moaning, low, guttural sounds of pleasure. My stomach turned as the realization hit me. I moved slowly, my body on autopilot, every nerve screaming at me to turn back, to leave. But I couldn't. I had to know. As I reached the hallway, the sounds grew louder. I stopped outside the door to the den, my hand hovering over the handle. For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me still clung to the hope that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. But I pushed the door open, and there they were. Rebecca, Bill, Lori, all three of them, naked and tangled together on the floor, lost in a scene that shattered everything I thought I knew about my wife, my brother, and his wife. The moment I saw them, something inside me snapped. All the suspicion, the hurt, and the betrayal boiled over in an instant. I wasn't thinking clearly. I couldn't. My fists clenched, and before I knew it, I lunged at Bill. "You son of a," I yelled, my voice raw with anger as I threw a punch square at his jaw. He yelped, stumbling back, but I didn't stop. I landed another blow on his ribs, fueled by the image of his smug face and what he'd done behind my back. "Alan, stop," Rebecca screamed, scrambling to her feet and trying to put herself between us. I shoved her aside, rage blinding me. Lori grabbed my arm, trying to pull me away, but I swung it out, catching her shoulder and making her stagger. "You think you can betray me like this and just get away with it?" I roared, turning back to Bill, who was holding his side, trying to shield himself from my blows. "Alan, please," Rebecca cried, throwing herself in front of Bill again. "Stop it. Just listen to me." I pointed a trembling finger at her, my voice trembling with fury. "You don't get to tell me to stop. You betrayed me. You betrayed us. How could you do this?" She tried to reach for me, her voice pleading. "Alan, it's not what you think. Not what I think," I bellowed, cutting her off. "I walked in on you. With my own brother. And Lori. What the hell am I supposed to think? I backed away, shaking my head in disbelief. My breathing was ragged, and I felt like the walls were closing in. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and held it up and started recording. You're going to tell me the truth. Right here, right now. If you lie to me even once, I will unleash hell on all of you. I hit the record button and pointed the phone at Rebecca. Start talking. Now. Rebecca looked at Bill and Lori, then back at me. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Not anymore. Alan. She started, her voice trembling. Bill and Lori they're swingers. They invited me to join them a few months ago. I stared at her, my stomach churning. And you just went along with it? Without even talking to me? Without even considering how this would affect our marriage? I wanted to talk to you, she said quickly, but I didn't know how. I thought you'd never understand. Bill and Lori said it could be a way for us to explore, to spice things up. Spice things up? I echoed, my voice cold and dripping with disgust. You think betraying me and sneaking around behind my back is spicing things up? She wiped at her face, but I wasn't moved. Lori finally spoke up, her tone defensive. Alan, this isn't as big of a deal as you're making it out to be. People have open relationships all the time. It's not like… Shut up, I snapped, cutting her off. I don't want to hear a damn word from you. I turned back to Rebecca. Is this what you wanted? For me to walk in on this circus? Did you even think about our son? What kind of example are you setting? Rebecca tried to step closer, her hands outstretched. Alan, please, I was going to tell you. I thought maybe you'd join us. Join you? I shouted, my voice echoing through the room. You're insane. All of you. I pulled my phone back and took a few pictures of the scene. The three of them, still partially undressed, looking stunned and ashamed. You're going to regret this, I said, my voice low and full of venom. Without another word, I turned and stormed out of the house, my heart pounding and my mind racing. As soon as I got home, I sent the pictures and the video to my parents and Rebecca's parents, adding only a single line. This is what your daughter has been up to. Then I grabbed Rebecca's clothes, her shoes, her bags, everything she owned, and threw it all out onto the street. I didn't care who saw. She didn't deserve my consideration anymore. I had barely sat down on the couch, my head spinning from everything that had just happened, when my phone started blowing up with calls. The first one was Rebecca's father. As I answered, his voice roared through the speaker. Alan, is it true? Did that daughter of mine… He stopped, his breathing heavy. If you see that bitch, tell her she doesn't have parents anymore. She's dead to us. I can't believe she'd do something like this. To you, to Timothy, to all of us. I didn't know what to say. His anger mirrored my own, but hearing it from him only made it feel more real. I muttered a quick, I'll let her know, and hung up. Seconds later, my father called. His tone was cold and furious, something I'd rarely heard from him. Alan, I just got off the phone with Billy. I told him he's disowned. He's no son of mine. I told him to pack his things and leave the city tonight, to run to parts unknown before I find him and kill him with my own hands. He's a disgrace to this family. I swallowed hard, the weight of my father's words hitting me. Dad, listen to me, Alan. He cut me off. File for divorce. File a restraining order if you have to. Save Timothy from that woman. She's not fit to be a mother. Do you hear me? I hear you, Dad, I said quietly, my voice trembling despite myself. Good. Stay strong, son. You didn't deserve this. When the call ended, I sat in silence for a moment, trying to process everything. But I didn't have much time to think. Within minutes, there was a loud, frantic banging at the front door. Alan! Rebecca's voice shrieked from outside. Open this door right now. I froze, my stomach twisting. Then I heard Bill's voice, deep and angry. You think you can humiliate us like that? Open the damn door. The banging grew louder, more violent. Against my better judgment, I got up and opened the door. The moment it swung open, Bill lunged at me, a wooden bat in his hand. You bastard! He roared, slamming the bat against the side of my head. Pain exploded through my skull, and I stumbled back, barely catching myself against the wall. Before I could react, the three of them were on me. Lori clawed at my face, her nails digging into my skin, while Rebecca screamed, How dare you refuse us? How dare you send that video to our parents? Bill swung the bat again, hitting my shoulder this time. You think you're better than us? You think you can just ruin our lives? He snarled. I tried to shield myself, but the blows kept coming. Lori kicked at my legs, and Rebecca slapped me across the face, over and over, her voice a shrill mix of rage and betrayal. "You ruined everything," she screamed. "You're a selfish, pathetic excuse for a man." I was on the ground now, curled up and trying to protect my head. But then, through the chaos, I heard a voice shouting from outside. "Hey, what the hell is going on here?" It was my neighbor, Mr. Carter, and he wasn't alone. He'd brought 3 other men with him, all of them rushing toward the house. Bill barely had time to react before Mr. Carter tackled him to the ground, wrestling the bat out of his hands. One of the other men grabbed Lori, pulling her away from me, while another restrained Rebecca. They were yelling, cursing, and thrashing, but they were no match for the 4 men who'd come to my rescue. "Call the cops," Mr. Carter barked. "I already did," one of the other men replied, holding Rebecca in a firm grip as she spat and screamed. I lay there on the floor, dazed and in pain, as the sounds of sirens grew louder in the distance. The trio was subdued, their shouts growing weaker as they realized they'd been caught red-handed. I was rushed to the hospital shortly after the commotion at my house. The throbbing pain in my head and shoulder was unbearable, and I could barely move without wincing. As the doctors treated my wounds, the police arrived to take my statement. One officer, a stern-looking man with graying hair, introduced himself as Officer Grant. "Mr. Davis, we've arrested the 3 individuals involved in the assault. However, I need to inform you that they've also filed charges against you for battery." My heart sank. "What?" I said, struggling to sit up. "They broke into my house, attacked me, and now they're claiming I attacked them?" Officer Grant nodded, his expression grim. "That's correct. Based on the injuries they sustained during the altercation, they filed a complaint. Unfortunately, this means we'll have to process you for battery charges as well." I clenched my fists, frustration boiling over. "Unbelievable," I muttered. "They're the ones who—" I stopped myself, taking a deep breath. "Fine, I'll deal with it. But they're not getting away with this." After the hospital cleared me for release, I was taken to the station. The cold, sterile environment did little to calm my nerves as I made the necessary phone call. "Mr. Parker, it's Alan," I said as soon as my lawyer picked up. "Alan, I've heard. I'm already on it," he said firmly. "Stay calm. I'll have you out of there as soon as possible." "Thanks," I muttered. "And once this is over, I want to start divorce proceedings. I also need restraining orders against all 3 of them. Rebecca, Bill, and Lori." "You got it," Parker said. "I'll take care of everything. Sit tight." It wasn't long before Parker arrived at the station, his sharp suit and confident demeanor commanding respect. He quickly secured my release on bail, and I was finally able to go home, though it no longer felt like home. 2 days later, Rebecca was served with divorce papers and restraining orders while still in jail. Parker made sure it was swift and clean. The police informed me that the case would go before a judge, which gave me a mix of dread and anticipation. The day of the hearing arrived, and the judge, an older man with a strict air of authority, introduced himself as Judge Reynolds. He was known for his unwavering devotion to traditional Christian values, something Parker assured me would work in my favor. As the case unfolded, the prosecutor presented the video I had recorded during the confrontation. Judge Reynolds watched it in silence, his expression growing darker with every passing second. When it ended, he leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "An abomination," he said, his voice cold and commanding. He turned his gaze to Rebecca, Bill, and Lori, who stood before him looking sheepish and uncomfortable. "You 3 are a disgrace to society. Your behavior is a curse upon mankind. Not only have you betrayed the sanctity of marriage, but you've also acted with violence and malice. It is abhorrent, and it will not be tolerated." Rebecca opened her mouth to speak, but the judge raised a hand to silence her. "Do not interrupt me," he said sharply. "You will have your turn to speak if I deem it necessary." He then turned his attention to me. "Mr. Davis, while I do not condone any act of violence, it is clear to me that your actions were provoked. However, as the complainant, you must decide whether to proceed with your charges against the defendants or to come to an agreement to settle this matter outside of court." Parker leaned over and whispered, "Alan, this is your chance to put this behind you. If you drop the charges, it will speed up your divorce and help with custody arrangements for Timothy." I nodded slowly. "Your Honor," I said, standing up, "I am willing to withdraw my complaint of battery against the defendants if it means resolving this matter quickly and moving on with my life." Judge Reynolds gave a curt nod. "Very well. In the interest of justice and expediency, I will accept this arrangement. The defendants will be released without further charges, But let it be known that their behavior has been noted by this court, and they will face the consequences of their actions in the divorce and custody proceedings. The divorce proceedings began 3 months after the chaos. Rebecca, dressed in a modest black dress that seemed carefully chosen to evoke sympathy, sat at one side of the courtroom. Her lawyer stood beside her, an older man who looked both stern and calculating. I sat on the other side, Timothy's future heavy on my mind. My lawyer, Mr. Parker, had prepared me well, and I felt confident in my stance. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, entered the room. Judge Jones, as she was known, had a reputation for no-nonsense rulings, especially in cases involving betrayal and negligence. Rebecca's lawyer was the first to speak. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Rebecca Davis, would like to express her deep remorse for her actions. She acknowledges the hurt and harm she has caused her husband and her family and is seeking reconciliation. She believes that counseling could help repair this marriage and save their family. Rebecca stood up, her voice trembling slightly as she added, Your Honor, I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I was forced into a situation I couldn't control. Bill and Lori manipulated me. They blackmailed me. I never wanted any of this to happen. Judge Jones raised an eyebrow, her expression stern. Blackmail, Mrs. Davis? Those are serious accusations. Do you have any evidence to support your claims? Rebecca hesitated, looking down at her hands. No, Your Honor, she admitted softly. Then why should this court entertain such allegations? Judge Jones asked, her tone icy. Without evidence, your claims carry no weight. Let's move on. Rebecca's lawyer quickly jumped in. Your Honor, while my client may not have evidence, her willingness to admit her mistakes and seek counseling demonstrates her commitment to making amends. She wants to save this marriage for the sake of their son. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I stood up, my voice firm but controlled. Your Honor, I appreciate the attempt at reconciliation, but I've made my position clear. Rebecca's actions weren't just mistakes, they were conscious choices. Choices that endangered our family and exposed our son to situations no child should ever witness. Counseling isn't going to undo what she did or rebuild the trust she destroyed. Judge Jones looked at me thoughtfully before turning back to Rebecca. Mrs. Davis, your husband has explicitly stated that he does not wish to continue this marriage. Furthermore, your actions have spoken louder than any words in this courtroom. You engaged in behavior that not only betrayed your spouse, but also endangered your son's emotional well-being. And now, you expect this court to force Mr. Davis into counseling he does not wish to participate in? That is not how this works. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, and she clutched at her lawyer's arm as if for support. Please, Your Honor, she said, her voice breaking. I love my husband. I love my family. I'll do whatever it takes. Judge Jones shook her head firmly. Mrs. Davis, love is not a word that can erase the damage you've caused. Your actions have spoken for themselves. This court sees no benefit in mandating counseling when the other party has denied any participation. As the judge prepared to announce her decision, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Rebecca sat stiffly, her hands clasped tightly together, while I focused on the floor, avoiding her gaze. Judge Jones's voice cut through the silence, firm and authoritative. After considering all evidence presented and the testimonies provided, this court grants the petition for divorce filed by Mr. Alan Davis. The dissolution of this marriage is final, she declared, pausing to allow the weight of her words to sink in. As part of the settlement, Mr. Davis will pay Mrs. Davis a modest alimony, reflective of the duration of the marriage and her current financial needs. Additionally, a portion of Mr. Davis's stock portfolio will be transferred to Mrs. Davis as agreed upon during mediation. Rebecca let out a barely audible gasp, her lips trembling, but the judge wasn't done. Regarding the custody of Timothy Davis, Judge Jones continued, her gaze now fixated on Rebecca. This court finds that Mrs. Davis's recent actions demonstrate a lack of judgment and accountability. The welfare and emotional stability of the child must be the highest priority. As such, full custody is awarded to Mr. Alan Davis. Mrs. Davis is granted supervised visitation rights to be reviewed after 6 months, contingent upon her proving herself capable of providing a safe and supportive environment for her son. Rebecca's face crumpled, and tears began to stream down her cheeks. She whispered to her lawyer, but he shook his head, indicating that there was little more to be done. I exhaled deeply, relief washing over me like a tidal wave. Judge Jones closed her folder with a sharp snap and looked at Rebecca one final time. Mrs. Davis, I suggest you use this opportunity to reflect on your actions and how they've impacted not just your husband but your child. Court is adjourned. The sound of the gavel echoed through the room, and I stood, ready to leave. As I turned to head for the door, Rebecca called out to me. "Alan," she said, her voice raw and desperate. "Please, can we talk?" I stopped but didn't turn around. "There's nothing left to say, Rebecca. You made your choices." She hurried over, ignoring the murmurs of those still in the room. "Alan, I made a mistake. I know I messed up, but please, we can fix this. For Tim, for us." I turned to face her, my expression cold. "Fix this? Rebecca, you destroyed everything. You didn't just hurt me, you hurt Tim. You hurt our family. There's no going back from this. I don't want to talk to you. Not now, not ever." Her tears intensified, and she reached out as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back. "I hope you choke on your own spit and die," I said firmly, then walked away without looking back. Over the next few weeks, Rebecca's calls and messages dwindled. She had no choice but to accept the terms of the divorce. Once the alimony and stock transfer were finalized, she packed up her things and left town quietly. Neighbors whispered about her departure, but I didn't care. My focus was on rebuilding my life with Timothy. She was gone, and so was the chaos she brought into our lives. A few weeks after the dust had settled in court, my father paid a visit. He showed up unannounced, as he often did, and Timothy lit up with joy at seeing his grandfather. After spending some time playing with Tim in the living room, Dad turned to me with that familiar, serious glint in his eye. "Got any whiskey, Alan?" he asked casually. "Of course," I said, fetching a bottle and 2 glasses. Dad rarely drank, but when he did, it was usually when he had something on his mind. I poured us both a glass and handed him one as he settled into the armchair, swirling the amber liquid in his glass thoughtfully. "I'm here to see my grandson," he said, taking a sip, "but I've also got some unfinished business in this neighborhood." He leaned back, fixing me with a look. "Is that sorry excuse of a brother of yours still living around here?" I nodded, hesitating for a moment before answering. "Yeah, he's still here. I've been keeping my distance, though. Don't want any more drama." Dad chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "Well, he won't be for long." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean by that?" He simply smiled, a knowing, almost sinister grin, and took another sip of his whiskey. "Let's just say some people need to learn the hard way what it means to betray family." I didn't press him for details, but over the next few days, things started happening. The first incident occurred when Bill's car, a shiny SUV he had always been so proud of, was torched outside a bar one night. The flames engulfed it completely, reducing it to a charred skeleton. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood, and I heard about it the next morning from a neighbor. "Did you hear about Bill's car?" she asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "Burnt to a crisp outside O'Malley's. No one saw who did it." I simply nodded, hiding my smirk. Dad wasn't one to make empty threats. 3 days later, Bill was attacked. He had been walking to his car when a large man, unknown to anyone in the neighborhood, jumped him. The assault left Bill with a black eye, a split lip, 3 cracked ribs, and a ruptured testicle. When I heard about it, I couldn't help but remember Dad's words. It didn't stop there. A few days later, Bill's dog, a mutt named Rusty, went missing. Lori was frantic, posting signs and asking neighbors if they had seen him. But the next morning, Bill received a package on his doorstep. Inside was a blood-soaked dog collar. Lori screamed when she saw it, and Bill turned pale, holding the collar with trembling hands. However, I later learned from Dad that Rusty was alive and well, happily staying at my father's property out in the country. "The dog never liked Bill anyway," Dad said with a grin when he called to give me the update. "He's much better off now." The collar incident was the final straw for Bill and Lori. The fear and paranoia were too much for them to handle. Lori had broken down in tears, begging Bill to leave. One evening, I saw a moving truck outside their house, and by nightfall, they were gone. Dad stopped by again that weekend, looking smug as ever. "Told you he wouldn't be around for long," he said, raising his glass in a toast. "Sometimes, Alan, people need a reminder of what it means to cross the wrong person. Family or not." A year had passed, and while the pain of everything that happened with Rebecca and Bill was still a part of me, I had learned to move on. Tim had been my anchor through it all. His smile, his laughter, and his endless curiosity helped me rebuild my life, and I was grateful for the bond we shared. That's when Kelly came into our lives. She was Tim's teacher, kind, patient, and more than just an educator. I had met her during parent-teacher conferences and was immediately struck by her warmth. Over time, we started chatting more during school events, and I discovered there was so much more to her than just being a teacher. Kelly had lost her husband, a cop, in a shootout a few years before. The way she talked about him, it wasn't with sadness, but with the kind of respect and love that showed the depth of their bond. She wasn't someone who wore her grief like a cloak, but rather, someone who had learned to live and love again despite it. We started to spend more time together, initially as friends, but there was a spark from the very beginning. Tim loved her, too. He'd come home from school and tell me about his day, his stories always ending with some new thing Miss Kelly had taught him or how kind she had been. He adored her. I think, in his own little way, he sensed that she was someone good for us, someone who could bring some light back into our lives. One evening, after a quiet dinner and a long walk through the park, I found myself holding Kelly's hand, looking at her with a mix of admiration and affection. I knew this was it. This was the woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, and I was ready to make it official. It wasn't a grand proposal, but it was sincere. I asked her, in the calmness of the evening, if she would marry me, if she would be a part of our little family. She looked at me, a mix of surprise and joy in her eyes, before answering with a soft, yes. When I told him that Kelly and I were getting married, his reaction was priceless. His face lit up like a Christmas tree, and without hesitation, he ran to his teacher the next morning and announced to the entire class, "Miss Kelly is going to be my mom now." The entire class burst into applause, and even Kelly's eyes welled up with happy tears. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.